My name is Tatiana, and I'm 31 years old. And for as long as I can remember, I was the family disappointment. Not loud enough to be rebellious, not polished enough to be impressive, just overlooked. Before I go any further, do me a quick favor. Like this video, comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the people who were forgotten the most end up with the most unforgettable stories. Now back to mine. My parents never missed an opportunity to compare me to my cousins. From the day I could hold a pencil, I was being measured against Alexandra's perfect penmanship. From the moment I got my first job, they reminded me that Lucas was already interning at a law firm. When I moved into a small apartment, they reminded me that Mariana and her husband had just bought a 4-bedroom house. It never mattered what I did. It was never enough. I wasn't enough. Family dinners always felt like a slow drip of humiliation, a slideshow of everyone else's accomplishments, degrees, promotions, weddings, baby showers. And me? I brought dessert, homemade, from scratch. But it sat untouched while everyone raved about Mariana's store-bought fruit tart. They never said it outright, of course. Not at first. But you learn to hear it between the silences. In the way my mother's voice softened when she spoke to my cousins. In the way my father leaned in when Lucas talked about stocks, but barely nodded when I mentioned starting my own small business. I was the sweet one, the good listener, the one who meant well. It was like watching your reflection in a cracked mirror. You can see yourself, but only in pieces. I used to think maybe I deserved it, that if I had just studied harder, dressed better, spoken with more authority, then maybe I'd be noticed, praised, celebrated. But no matter what I did, the bar moved. When I launched my online craft store, they said it was cute. When I paid off my student loans without asking for help, they said I was quietly responsible. When I finally stopped showing up to every single family function, they said I was going through something. I was going through something, all right. I was going through the slow, silent unraveling of trying to be visible to people who only had eyes for perfection, or at least what they thought perfection looked like. My cousins never rubbed it in. That would have been easier, honestly. But they were polite, pleasant, kind, which made the sting worse. Because when someone outshines you and still manages to be nice about it, you're not even allowed to be mad. You just smile, number exhausted, and you wonder if maybe you were always meant to be the background character in your own family's movie. My breaking point came one Thanksgiving. I had brought a dish, my grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe, the one that used to win blue ribbons at the county fair. I walked in with it warm in my hands, proud of the smell, the presentation, the memories it carried. But the moment I entered the kitchen, my mom barely looked up. "Oh good, you brought something too," she said. Then turned to Mariana, who was arranging a cheese platter from a store. "Now this is elegant," my mother beamed, snapping a picture of the cheese with her phone. I stood there, pie in hand, invisible. That night, they sat me at the far end of the table, next to the folding chair. Not out of malice, out of habit. I was always the extra place. The one they squeezed in if needed. The one who didn't mind if she was overlooked. Except, I did mind. I minded every time I laughed too loudly just to be heard. I minded every time I offered to help clean just to have a reason to stay. I minded every single time someone asked me, "So, what's new with you?" And then looked away before I finished answering. After dessert, my cousin Lucas announced that he and his wife were expecting twins. Everyone cheered, cried, toasted. No one touched my pie. I left before anyone noticed I was gone. That night, I sat in my car with the leftover pie on the passenger seat and a tight knot in my throat. Not anger, not grief, just clarity. I would never be the daughter they bragged about. Never be the cousin whose name they dropped at dinner parties. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be. Because while they were busy watching Alexandra become a pediatrician, and Lucas make investment deals, and Mariana redecorate her new house for the 3rd time, I was building something too. Silently, patiently, out of view. My craft store had started making real money. I'd landed 3 major wholesale deals. I'd been saving religiously, investing quietly, learning everything I could about finance, marketing, and digital strategy, while they thought I was just playing with ribbons and paper flowers. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I was closing in on something big, something that would shift everything. Not out of revenge, out of self-worth. I didn't want to impress them anymore. I wanted to own myself. And soon, I would own a lot more than that. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving dinner, I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a marble staircase or infinity pool or sprawling lawn with trimmed hedges. It had cracks in the ceiling, peeling paint in the hallway, and a porch swing that creaked like an old man with stories to tell. But it was mine, bought in full. No mortgage, no cosigner, no help. I signed the final documents at a small law office with nothing but a pen in my hand and 10 years of invisible effort in my chest. I should have cried. I thought I might, but instead, I just exhaled, like my lungs were finally telling the truth for the first time. No one in my family knew. I didn't tell them, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to savor it, alone, quietly, without commentary, without comparison, without someone reminding me how impressive my cousins were. This home wasn't for them. It was for me. And for the first time in my life, I wanted something to exist without needing their approval to validate it. The neighborhood was modest. Old oaks lined the streets, their branches twisting like arms raised in praise or warning. I couldn't tell. Kids rode bikes. Mailboxes leaned slightly from years of weather. It was real. It felt like the kind of place where someone could finally be. The house itself needed love. The kind of love I had spent years giving out without getting back. So I poured it in. I patched the cracks in the ceiling. I painted the hallway a soft shade of sea glass green. I fixed the porch swing with new chains and oiled the joints until it moved like a sigh instead of a groan. Each task became a kind of ritual, a reclaiming, not just of space, but of identity. Because for every screw I turned, every corner I scrubbed, every board I mended, I was undoing something. A moment, a comment, a memory. My dad telling me I was too sensitive. My mom saying I wasn't as driven as Alexandra. Lucas chuckling when I told him I wanted to run my own business. Every nail was a rebuttal, every brushstroke, a statement. I matter. And still, I said nothing to them. Christmas came and went. I skipped the family party that year. Sent a polite card. No explanation. I stayed home instead, in my home, baking cookies that didn't have to impress anyone. I sat by my fireplace, warm socks on my feet, and watched the snow pile up outside the window like layers of silence finally settling. It was the first time I'd felt full, not hungry for their attention, not aching for their pride, just present. But peace is a quiet thing, and quiet things don't stay untouched forever. In January, the calls started. It was subtle at first. A voicemail from my mom, then a follow-up from my dad, then a group message from one of my aunts. Hope you're doing okay. Your parents seem stressed lately. I ignored them all, not out of cruelty, but because I knew that they weren't reaching out for me. They were reaching out because something was cracking, and they didn't know how to ask for help without dressing it in guilt or performance. Then, late one night, my father called. He didn't leave a message, but he called twice, back to back. That was new. I stared at the screen as it lit up in the dark. His name still saved as just Dad. No emojis, no hearts, just Dad. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my banking app. Not out of habit, out of instinct. Sure enough, I saw the automatic payment I had quietly been making, the one they never knew about, had bounced back. It wasn't my account that was the issue. It was their mortgage. It had been overdue. Again. My chest tightened, not in fear, but in resignation. They hadn't changed. They had simply gotten better at hiding the damage. And now, the foundation was crumbling, just like the ones they never noticed in me. I thought about calling back. Then I didn't. Instead, I opened the drawer where I'd filed the deed to my home. Ran my fingers over the embossed seal, read my name on the paper, clear and irrefutable. I owned this. All of it. And it changed everything. Because this time, if they were coming to me, they weren't coming to the spare chair at the table. They were coming to the person who held the keys. The next morning, I called him back. Not because I felt guilty. Not because I wanted to rescue anyone. But because I needed to hear it. Out loud. My father answered on the second ring. No hello. Just a sharp exhale. Like he hadn't decided yet whether he was relieved or disappointed it was me. Hi, Dad, I said calmly. There was a pause. A short one. But I could feel the weight of it. I wasn't sure if you'd call back, he finally said. I didn't answer that part. Instead, I let silence do its job. People like my father hate silence. It makes them sit with what they've buried. He coughed. So, things have been rough. I waited. We're behind on the house, he said, and his voice dipped just slightly lower. A few payments. Nothing we can't fix. Just temporary. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. How far behind? Another pause. Longer this time. 4 months. That hit me harder than I expected. 4 months. That wasn't temporary. That was deliberate. That was watching a fire start and deciding to fan it because you didn't want to admit it was burning. I took a breath. Not shallow, not sharp. Just steady. What happened? I asked. And that's when the spin started. My dad was always good at narratives, the kind where nothing was ever really his fault. The economy, a contract falling through. The bank being inflexible, my mom's medical bills, unfair taxes, unlucky timing. I'd heard it all before. But this time, I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk, because I knew, somewhere in the excuses, the truth would surface, and when it did, it came not from what he said, but what he didn't say. He never once asked how I was. Not once. Not a how's work, or are you doing okay? Just desperation, dipped in pride, trying not to sound like begging. So, he finally said, his tone shifting like a car struggling to downshift. If you knew anyone who could maybe help us, just until we get back on our feet? There it was. Not even a direct ask. Just the implication that I should be the one to offer. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The house I grew up in, the creaky floor in the upstairs hallway, the dented railing, the kitchen with the too small pantry, the front door that always stuck in the winter. And then I pictured my name on the deed of my own home. It was more than a contrast. It was a reckoning. Let me think about it, I said softly. He hesitated. Yeah, sure, of course. He tried to make his voice light again, normal, but it didn't land. I wasn't the same girl he used to talk circles around. We hung up without a goodbye. I sat on my couch for a long time after that. Coffee gone cold, phone face down, no music, no distractions, just me and a question echoing in my chest. Do I help them? Because part of me still ached to be chosen, to be praised, to be seen. But I knew the help they wanted wasn't me. It was money, stability, a solution. And when they got it, they'd go right back to admiring my cousins at the next family dinner. Still, I remembered what it felt like to be afraid you'd lose your roof. I'd lived that fear too. And even if no one helped me back then, I wasn't sure I could just stand by and watch them sink. So I made a decision. Not out of guilt. Not out of longing. But out of power. Because this time, I wouldn't be the invisible daughter trying to buy love with favors. I would be the woman who set the terms. The next day, I drove to their house. It looked the same as it always had. Same peeling paint on the porch. Same cracked window in the garage. But this time, I didn't feel like I belonged to it. It felt smaller. I knocked on the door. My mother answered. For a moment, she looked surprised to see me. Then she stepped aside. Come in. I walked through the house I used to tiptoe in, where I once stayed quiet to keep the peace, where I learned how to be small before I ever learned how to be enough. They sat me at the kitchen table. No cousins this time, just the three of us. I didn't draw it out. I'll help, I said. My father nodded quickly, as if he knew it would happen. But I have conditions. That stopped him. What kind of conditions? He asked cautiously. I'm not giving you money, I said. I'm buying the house. The silence was immediate. My mom blinked. You… what? I'll pay off what's owed, I said. Take over the mortgage. The house will be in my name. You can stay. But it'll be my property. My dad scoffed. That's not help. That's a takeover. No, I said. That's what real help looks like when trust has been broken. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. You compared me to everyone for years. Made me feel like I didn't belong to this family. I built everything on my own. Now I'm offering you stability. On my terms. This isn't revenge, it's protection. For you. For this house. For me. My mom looked at him, then at me. She knew I meant it, and that I wouldn't bend. After a long pause, my father leaned back in his chair. Not defeated, but different. Okay, he said finally. We'll talk to the bank. No, I replied. I already did. Their eyes widened. I placed a folder on the table. Inside, everything was arranged. I'd done my research. I'd planned for this. Because while they were still reacting, I was already 10 steps ahead. They stared at the folder like it was something radioactive. My father's fingers twitched slightly, like he wanted to reach for it, but couldn't bring himself to touch the reality inside. My mother's lips parted, then closed. She looked between me and the table like she wasn't sure where the threat was coming from. I sat across from them with the calmness of someone who'd been dismissed too many times to care about being liked anymore. You already talked to the bank? My dad finally asked. Yes, I said. And to the loan officer, and the county clerk. Everything is ready. All that's needed is your signatures. He scoffed, more out of habit than conviction. You've really planned this out, huh? I nodded. I had to. What I didn't say, but what hung heavy in the air, was that I had to plan this, because no one ever planned for me. When I left this house at 22, it wasn't in a flurry of encouragement. It was in quiet defeat, tired of trying to be seen. And in the years since, every financial lesson, every late night, every client call and budget spreadsheet and tax return, I did that alone. This wasn't just a house to me. It was a symbol. A battlefield I refused to lose twice. My mom finally opened the folder and began skimming through the documents. She didn't say anything, but her fingers trembled slightly. What does this mean for us? She asked. Her voice was low, embarrassed maybe, soft in a way I hadn't heard before. It means the house won't be taken, I said. It means no foreclosure, no sheriff's notices, no eviction. And after that? My dad asked, eyes narrowing. You planning to sell it? Kick us out? I met his gaze without flinching. Number. But I will be the legal owner, and I'll expect the property to be treated with care. It's not a gift, it's protection, for all of us. He bristled at the word owner, because it meant I held the power now, and power was something he never imagined me holding, not when there were always shinier cousins to compare me to. Still, he didn't argue further. He just leaned back in his chair and looked out the window, as if trying to calculate whether his pride was more valuable than his roof. My mother signed first. Her signature was small, precise, hesitant. My father followed with a slow, deliberate scribble. Not because he wanted to, because he had no other option. And just like that, the deed was mine. Not symbolically, not emotionally, legally. I folded the folder closed and slid it back into my bag. I expected to feel triumphant, maybe even smug, but all I felt was tired. This wasn't a victory parade. It was a quiet reclaiming of something that should never have been stolen in the first place. We sat in silence for a long while after that. The kind of silence that only happens when the balance shifts and no one knows who they are anymore. Eventually, my mom broke it. You've done well for yourself, she said quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come. I nodded once. Yeah, I have. She looked like she wanted to say more, but the words caught somewhere between pride and shame. My father stood up first. Will you stay for dinner? He asked. I looked at him. This man who had once laughed when I said I wanted to be self-employed, who had rolled his eyes when I brought business books to Thanksgiving, who had compared me to Lucas until I started comparing myself to dust. And still, something in his voice was soft, not warm, but not cold. I have things to do, I said. Maybe another time. He nodded, not offended, just quiet. I left through the same front door I'd walked out of years ago, the same door I used to close quietly so I wouldn't be accused of slamming things. But this time, I didn't tiptoe. I didn't shrink. I closed it with purpose. And when I got in my car, I didn't cry, not from sadness, not from relief, but from release. Because after years of being the spare chair, the second thought, the backup plan, I had become the foundation. They didn't know yet how much would change. They didn't know that I had plans, not just for the house, but for myself. They didn't know that this ownership would be the beginning of a much bigger shift. And I wasn't going to explain it to them. Not yet. Because some lessons aren't taught, they're lived. The papers were signed, the deal done, and the title transferred. On paper, I was now the legal owner of the house I once wasn't even allowed to decorate for the holidays. But emotional ownership takes longer, and my parents weren't quite ready to see me as the one holding the keys. The first few days after the transfer were filled with an odd tension. No one said anything directly, but the atmosphere in the house felt like walking on polished glass. Too clean, too careful, too forced. My dad kept himself busy outside, cleaning the gutters, reorganizing the shed. My mom stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, wiping counters that were already clean, opening and closing cabinets as if trying to confirm everything was still in its place. It was strange watching them act like guests in the home they used to lord over. Stranger still that they didn't quite know how to talk to me now, and I didn't know how to talk to them either. Because the power dynamic had shifted, but the wounds hadn't healed, not even close. I hadn't come into this expecting apologies. I wasn't naive. I knew my parents weren't the kind of people who said, "I'm sorry," easily. But I did expect acknowledgement. A moment of recognition, something that resembled gratitude. Instead, I got politeness, measured silence, awkward pleasantries over coffee. I didn't need them to fall at my feet, but I did need them to stop pretending everything was normal. Because it wasn't. One morning, about a week after I took ownership, I showed up early. I had warned them I'd be stopping by to review a few maintenance issues I'd already flagged in the house report. Repairs I was now responsible for as the owner. When I arrived, my dad was in the kitchen, flipping through a newspaper like he didn't expect me to show. "You're here early," he said, not looking up. "I told you yesterday I'd be here by 8. He shrugged. "Didn't think you meant it literally." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop at the dining table and pulled up the checklist I had made. Roof inspection, HVAC filter replacement, electrical grounding. Small things, but necessary. The kind of tasks homeowners care about. I started going through the notes out loud, outlining the repairs I'd be scheduling, what rooms might need to be cleared, and when the contractors would arrive. That's when my dad lowered his paper and gave me a look. A small one, but unmistakable. It said, "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" But the truth was, I wasn't. I didn't enjoy asserting myself. I wasn't looking to punish him. I just wanted to be taken seriously, for once. "This is what being a homeowner looks like," I said, not unkindly. "It's not just paying bills. It's keeping things in shape, making decisions." He scoffed quietly, but didn't argue. That evening, I got a call from my mom. She rarely called me just to talk, so I answered, unsure of what tone she'd take. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe you could come to dinner Friday night. Just us." A meal I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. The old reflex. The one that expected some trap, some favor, some backhanded compliment, was still strong. But another part of me wanted to see if this was real, if maybe, just maybe, something was shifting. Okay, I said. Friday. When I arrived that evening, the house smelled like baked chicken and roasted vegetables. It was oddly nostalgic. The kitchen was warm. The table was set for 3. It almost felt like family. Almost. Dinner was simple, quiet. They asked a few questions about my business, not many. I answered without giving away too much. Then came the question I had half expected all along. So, my mom said gently, does this mean you'll be moving back in soon? I blinked. Moving back? She smiled carefully. Well, now that it's your house, wouldn't it make sense? I looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, I realized something. They still didn't see me as the owner. They saw me as the daughter, the one who bought the house but surely wouldn't change its rhythm, the one who saved the roof, but not the rules. I'm not moving back, I said. This isn't about that. My father's fork clinked against his plate. You'd rather keep paying for it and not live here? It's not about convenience, I said. It's about boundaries. They didn't like that word. Boundaries had never existed in this family. I'm not evicting you, I added. But I am going to manage this like the property it is. What does that mean? My dad asked. It means I'll be checking in monthly. It means I expect the repairs I schedule to be respected. It means if financial issues come up again, I want to be notified immediately. No hiding it. Silence. And then, so we're tenants now? I didn't answer. Because yes, they were. Emotionally, they'd been tenants in my life for years, occupying space without paying attention. Now, it was literal. My mom looked down. It's just hard to accept. All this change. I know, I said. It's hard for me too. And it was. Because despite everything, I wasn't made of stone. I still craved connection. Still hoped they'd see the version of me I'd spent a decade becoming. But if they couldn't, I wouldn't beg anymore. That night, I left without dessert. The table was set. The food was warm. But the air was thick. And in my car, I sat in the driveway longer than I should have, watching the lights flicker in the kitchen window, wondering if they'd ever truly see me. Not as the backup cousin, not as the one who brought pie, not as the safety net, but as the foundation. I hadn't thought much about them lately. The cousins, the gold standard children, the walking resumes my parents used as measuring sticks for everything I wasn't, but then they showed up, just like that. It started with a group text. Hey fam, we're in town next week. Thought we'd do a big dinner like old times. Let's catch up. The message was from Alexandra, of course, the Queen Bee, Stanford graduate, Fortune 500 consultant, 2 perfect children and an Instagram feed to prove it. Lucas replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Daniel chimed in with, let's do it. And then my phone buzzed again. Another message. My name. Can we do it at Mom and Dad's? It's been forever since we were all there together. I stared at the screen. The audacity was almost impressive. I hadn't been invited to one of these family dinners in years. And now suddenly, they wanted to come to my house, without even realizing it. The irony made me laugh. A real, bitter laugh. Because, of course, they didn't know. Why would they? To them, I was still the cousin who brought store-bought brownies, the one with potential who never quite lived up to it, the girl who worked online and probably lived in a basement somewhere with string lights and a thrifted couch. They didn't know the house belonged to me now. They didn't know I was the one keeping the lights on. They didn't know that while they were jet-setting and celebrating promotions, I had built something solid, quietly, permanently. I didn't respond to the message right away. Instead, I drove to the house. My parents were in the living room when I arrived, the TV playing low, some rerun of a game show neither of them were really watching. I sat down across from them. They want to do dinner here, I said. My mom perked up. Oh, that would be lovely. We haven't seen them in ages. My father nodded. They always bring good wine. That one sentence made something clench in my chest. Of course they were excited. The golden children were coming home. The validation they craved was arriving on their doorstep in tailored coats and designer handbags. I haven't said yes, I told them. They both turned to look at me. Why not? My mom asked. Because this is my house, and they don't know that. She blinked. Oh, well, I'm sure they'd be happy for you. That was generous and untrue. Alexandra didn't process other people's successes well unless they were mirror images of her own. Lucas measured everything in salary brackets. Daniel had made a hobby out of calling me quirky whenever I spoke. They never once checked in on me when I left, I said. Not when I was struggling, not when I started my business, not even when Dad got sick. But now, they want to come and have dinner in the house I pay for. My dad cleared his throat. They're still family. So am I said. But that never stopped anyone from making me feel like a mistake. The words hung there like dust in sunlight, visible, heavy, suspended. My mother's eyes softened slightly. You've always been different. I smiled at that. Not because it was kind, but because I had finally learned that different wasn't a flaw. It was freedom. I'll host the dinner, I said after a moment. But they'll know. Before they walk in, they'll know this house is mine. They'll know I saved it. And if they can't handle that, they can eat somewhere else. My father didn't argue. He just looked tired. Maybe because deep down, he knew I was right. The night of the dinner came fast. I arrived early, unlocked the front door, and began to set the table. Not with my mother's old plates, with mine. Clean, minimal, matte ceramic, each one placed deliberately, each glass shining under the warm lights I'd had installed last month. I brought flowers. I lit candles. But not for them. I did it for me. Because if they were going to walk into my space, I wanted it to feel like mine in every detail. My parents didn't ask to rearrange anything, didn't question the playlist playing softly in the background, didn't touch the wine I'd set out. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to step back and let me lead. Then the doorbell rang. Alexandra was first, of course. Perfect curls. Lipstick that matched her purse. A confident smile that didn't falter until she stepped into the living room and saw me standing at the head of the table. She blinked. Oh, you're here early. I set the table, I said calmly. She looked around. This is new. It's mine, I said simply. Lucas arrived next, carrying a bottle of champagne. He looked confused at first, then amused. Wait, are you hosting? I nodded. You live here now? I looked him in the eye. I own it. That stopped him. Alexandra's smile flickered. You mean you're renting it? No, I said, letting the words land with the weight they deserved. I bought it. I'm the legal owner. I paid off the mortgage. The house is in my name. Daniel arrived mid-sentence and caught just enough to freeze in the entryway. No one said anything for a full 15 seconds, and in that silence, I felt it. The shift, the recognition, the slow, painful recalibration of a story they had written without me, and now had to rewrite. Alexandra recovered first, of course. Well, congratulations. She said it like it hurt, like swallowing gravel. Lucas gave a low whistle. Damn, didn't see that coming. I smiled. No one did. Dinner went on. They tried to steer the conversation back to familiar waters. Vacations, job updates, kids. But something was off. Because the house didn't respond to them anymore. It didn't echo their laughter the way it used to. It didn't fold itself around their presence. It belonged to me now. And it knew it. Something changed that night. Not just in the room. In me. It wasn't loud or sudden. There was no dramatic confrontation, no wine glass thrown or tears shed over dessert. Just a quiet, irreversible shift in how I saw them, and how I saw myself. For so long, I'd been the one sitting at the edge of the table, laughing a little too late, trying to fold myself into a version they might respect. I used to analyze their words like puzzles, desperate to find the hidden approval between syllables. I thought if I dressed the right way, spoke with the right tone, brought the right side dish, I might finally be let in. But sitting at the head of that table, watching them squirm in polite discomfort as they realized the ground beneath them had shifted, I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt sovereign. The next morning, I didn't replay every moment of the dinner in my head like I used to. I didn't question the way I'd said things or wonder if my success made them uncomfortable. I didn't wonder if I had been too much. Instead, I went for a walk. Just me. No headphones, no distractions. The kind of walk you take when you no longer owe the world an explanation. As I passed familiar streets, the ones I used to walk with my head down, I noticed how much had changed. The houses were the same, but I wasn't. I didn't look into windows wishing I lived there. I didn't compare my life to theirs. I wasn't chasing anymore. I had stopped running, and in the stillness, I'd found something rarer than applause. Peace. The week after the dinner, I didn't hear much from my cousins. A few passive posts online, photos from a different gathering I wasn't invited to, though this time, it didn't sting. Because now I understood something essential. They weren't a standard. They were just people, flawed, curated, insecure in ways they'd never admit. And more importantly, they were not my competition. I was building a life that didn't need to be compared. It stood on its own. For the first time, I started dreaming again. Not just about proving people wrong, but about building things that made me proud, things no one could take away. I hired a designer to renovate the guest room, the one I had stayed in as a child when relatives were visiting, the one that always felt temporary, like I didn't belong anywhere in the house. I had them knock out a wall, expand the space, add light. I turned it into an office, a sanctuary. And as I stood in that finished room, surrounded by shelves I chose and windows I paid for, I realized something. This house was no longer a symbol of what I endured. It was a monument to what I overcame. I didn't keep the old wallpaper. I didn't cling to the furniture I grew up resenting. I let it all go, because I wasn't trying to recreate the past. I was rewriting the present. One day, while organizing the kitchen, I found a faded photograph tucked in a drawer. It was from one of those old family barbecues. Everyone smiling, the cousins grouped together like a magazine cover. I was in the corner, half smiling, holding a plate. I stared at that photo for a long time, not with sadness, not even with anger, just awareness. That girl in the corner had no idea she'd one day own the house everyone gathered in. She didn't know that one day she'd be the one setting the table, not for approval, but for herself. She just hoped to be seen. I put the photo in a box, not to preserve it, but to release it. Because that version of me was no longer here, and I had no intention of inviting her back, not out of shame, but because she did her job. She survived. She held the pain long enough for me to become the woman who could heal it. In the weeks that followed, my parents became quieter around me, not out of distance, but something closer to respect. They didn't challenge my decisions about the house. They didn't question my presence. There was even a morning where my father passed me the mail and said, "One came for the owner." No sarcasm, no resistance, just quiet recognition. It wasn't love, but it was something, and for now, that was enough. I didn't know what the future would hold with them. Maybe we'd never become close. Maybe they'd never say the words I once ached for, but that no longer decided my worth. I had stopped measuring myself by their yardstick. And for the first time in my life, I had a clear view of the horizon. Unblocked, unfiltered, mine. It started with a letter. Not a bill. Not a statement. Not an ad disguised as urgency. A real letter. Stamped. Addressed. Folded by hand and slipped into the mailbox I had paid to replace last summer after a storm bent the old one like a spine too long ignored. It was from the county assessor's office. Routine property tax update. Nothing dramatic, except that it had been addressed to my father, not me, despite the deed change, despite the mortgage clearance, despite the paperwork filed in triplicate. They still didn't see me. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd been ignored for decades, and stared at the envelope in my hands. It wasn't about the oversight. It was about the persistence of an old story refusing to update itself. To the world, I was still invisible in this space. To the systems that kept records, I was an asterisk. To the family that had once measured me against cousins with brighter degrees and cleaner narratives, I was the background. And yet, here I sat, legally bound to this roof, financially responsible for every nail and pipe and tile, and emotionally tethered to people who had no idea how much they owed me. That was the part no one talked about. Not the money, not the time, but the emotional debt. The kind you can't invoice, the years of being overlooked, the decades of being less than, the energy it took to stay soft when the world wanted you to harden just to be heard. I had paid all of that, in silence. And now, they lived under a roof I rebuilt, still unaware of the weight I carried on their behalf. My mother knocked on my bedroom door that afternoon. She asked if I wanted to join her at the store. Nothing special, just groceries. It was the first invitation in months that wasn't layered in need or guilt. I almost said no, but something in her tone felt human. So I went. In the car, we talked about neutral things, traffic, recipes, the weather that had been indecisive all week. But then she glanced at me while stopped at a red light and said, "You've changed." I didn't respond. Because yes, I had. But she hadn't asked that question when it mattered. She hadn't looked at me when I was becoming. She only looked now, when the end result was comfortable to be near. "You're quieter now," she added. "But also, stronger." Still, I said nothing. Because some acknowledgments come too late to feel like gifts. They land like receipts, evidence of what was missed. In the store, she let me push the cart. Let me decide the brand of cereal. Didn't correct me when I reached for the better olive oil. These were small things. But they were new, and sometimes change starts with silence. On the way home, she asked if I wanted to invite the cousins for Easter. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. Because no matter how many rooms I owned, they still wanted to fill them with the past. "No," I said softly. "Not this year." She didn't argue. And that, more than anything, told me something was shifting. Back home, I found my father fixing a hinge on the back door. Not well, but sincerely. He looked up, nodded once, and went back to work. No lecture, no demands, just movement. That night, I sat on the back porch, the one I had sanded and stained myself. I watched the sunset drape the backyard in amber and considered how far I'd come, not just financially, not even emotionally, but generationally. I had become the net, the one who caught them when the system they trusted collapsed under its own assumptions. I was the quiet emergency plan they never saw coming. They had gambled everything on the cousins. But when the storm hit, it was me holding the umbrella. And they would never be able to repay that. Not fully, because I hadn't just given them shelter. I had given them time, stability, dignity, and I hadn't done it for praise. I had done it for the girl I used to be, the one who waited for someone to come back for her, the one who never had a net. That girl deserved to be the hero of her own story, and now, she was. Growing up, I was always the footnote, the afterthought, the "oh, and my name too" tacked onto holiday invitations, family emails, group photos. I wasn't invisible, but I was never essential. It was like I existed in the negative space around my cousins. They were the main event, the honor roll stars, the science fair winners, the future doctors and CEOs. And I was the one who liked to draw, the one who was so sweet but lacking direction. Every time I heard my parents say things like, "Lucas just got another scholarship," or "Did you see Alexandra's internship in DC?" I'd brace myself, because I knew what came next, the comparison, the shrinking, the subtle sigh in their voice when someone asked what I was doing. "She's figuring things out," they'd say. "Still finding her path." What they meant was, she's not like them, not polished, not predictable, not profitable. But what they didn't realize was that all the while, I was building something, quietly, relentlessly. Not a resume that would impress them, but a life that would one day outlast theirs. And now, the proof was everywhere, in the title on the deed. in the contractors who called me for approval, in the mortgage statements with my name printed in clean, black ink. I hadn't come last. I had taken a different route, and while they flew first class towards someone else's dream, I walked, slow, steady, certain. And in the end, I built the place they'd all come running to when their paths collapsed. A week after the property tax notice, I received another envelope. This one wasn't from the county, it was from Lucas. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 2 pages. I didn't expect it. We hadn't spoken since the dinner. He hadn't even followed up with a text. But here it was, in neat cursive. I didn't know the house was yours. I didn't know what you've been doing all these years. And I didn't realize how much we owed you until I walked through the door and felt how wrong we were. He went on to admit that he'd underestimated me. That they all had. That my quiet made them assume I wasn't building anything worth mentioning. You didn't come last, he wrote. You just took longer because you were building something real. I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, not crying, not gloating, just breathing, letting the words land. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a recognition. And that, in some ways, was even more powerful. Later that month, my mother started leaving the kitchen light on when she knew I'd be arriving. She began asking for my opinion on things, paint colors, budget choices, even the best kind of mulch for the front garden. It was subtle, but it was new. My father, too, changed in small ways. He stopped calling my work freelance stuff. He stopped questioning why I worked from my own office. He even asked, once, how I'd learned so much about managing money. Trial and error, I told him. What I didn't say was, because you never taught me, because I had to learn the hard way. Still, I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Because bitterness holds you hostage to the version of them that hurt you. And I had already freed myself. I didn't need their apologies to move forward. But their respect. That mattered. And I was beginning to see it bloom in the little spaces where silence used to live. One morning, while trimming the hedges outside, I saw Daniel walking up the path. No announcement, no warning. He had flown in for a conference and wanted to drop by. I met him at the porch, shears in hand, dirt on my knees. He blinked, surprised. I didn't realize you still do all this yourself. I shrugged. It's my house. He smiled awkwardly. Right. Still getting used to that. I didn't invite him in. Not out of spite, but because some doors stay closed until people stop knocking out of curiosity and start knocking with humility. He didn't stay long, but before leaving, he said, I was wrong about you. I think we all were. I nodded once, and that was enough. Because I didn't need a parade. I didn't need a family group chat suddenly overflowing with praise. I just needed the truth to finally echo louder than the myths they'd built around me. That night, I sat in the living room alone, lights low, tea in hand. I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the couch I'd chosen, the shelves I'd filled. Everything in the room had been curated by me, not to impress, but to reflect. This was the life they never saw coming, the version of me they never thought to root for. But now, they had no choice but to see me. Not as the babysitter, not as the fallback, but as the foundation. I hadn't just arrived. I had built the destination. And the people who once assumed I'd always come last? They were living in the guest room. I used to think being the backup plan was the worst fate imaginable. Growing up, I was the one you called when the babysitter canceled, when a cousin needed help with homework, when someone forgot to pick up the cake and remembered me just in time. I was the, oh, she'll do it girl, reliable, available, forgettable. And at some point, I internalized that. Started to believe I was someone who filled in the gaps, not someone you built the whole picture around. But life has a funny way of flipping the script, especially when you stop reading from the pages someone else handed you. It started quietly, like most turning points do. A late payment notice on my parents' kitchen table. A voicemail my mother deleted before my father could hear it. Whispers behind closed doors that grew louder once I knew what to listen for. They were drowning. Slowly. Proudly. Privately. because they were the type of people who'd rather pretend to be floating than admit they were sinking. And for a while, I let them. I told myself they never would have done the same for me. I remembered every eye roll, every, "Why can't you be more like Alexandra?" Every holiday where my chair was added as an afterthought. But spite has a short shelf life, and I had outgrown bitterness. So I stepped in. I made calls. I filled out forms. I leveraged every connection I'd built, every dollar I had saved, every ounce of strength I had earned. And when I signed the deed to the house in my name, I didn't do it to win. I did it so they wouldn't lose. Because sometimes, the people who discard you still live inside you. Their words, their absence, their disappointments. And if you're not careful, they keep deciding who you are long after you've left the room. But I had decided something different. I was no longer the backup. I was the blueprint. A year passed. The house changed. Not just physically, though I did update the floors, paint the walls, and replace the drafty windows. It changed in spirit. There was laughter now. Real laughter. Not performative, not competitive, not filtered through cousin comparison. My parents stopped asking what Alexandra was doing. Stopped saying things like, "Lucas is probably too busy to call." They started asking about me. What I was working on. Where I saw myself in 5 years. If I needed help with anything around the house. And though their voices still held remnants of the past, I could tell something had shifted. They were beginning to understand that I had become someone without their permission. And that I wasn't asking for it anymore. One afternoon, my mom came into the kitchen while I was paying bills. She looked nervous, the way she used to look when she needed to ask a favor but didn't want to say the words out loud. She held an envelope in her hands. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a letter. For you." I took it and opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. "You saved us. You didn't have to. We never made it easy. But you did it anyway. We don't say it enough. But thank you." There was no signature. Just the words. I looked up at her. She shrugged. "Your father helped me write it." I nodded. "Thanks," I said. Not because the note fixed everything, but because it meant something. They weren't the kind of people who apologized with ease. But they were trying. And that mattered. One night, I hosted dinner. Just me and them. No cousins. No performance. We sat at the table I had built, literally, with wood I chose, and stain I applied with my own 2 hands. We ate quietly at first. Then my father cleared his throat. "Do you remember the time we forgot your birthday?" he asked. I paused. "Which one?" He chuckled. Dry. Regretful. "The one where we remembered Lucas's engagement instead." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember." He looked at me. And for the first time, really looked. "I've thought about that day a lot," he said. "How we didn't even realize we'd hurt you until weeks later. We never made space for you. We just expected you to be fine." My mother added, "Because you always were." "I wasn't," I said quietly. "I just never told you." Silence. But not the bad kind. The kind that settles between people who are finally speaking the same language. These days, the house feels different. Not just because I own it, but because I shaped it. There's art on the walls, laughter in the hallway, peace in the corners that once held only comparison. I've rebuilt more than the physical space. I've rebuilt my identity. No longer the shadow, no longer the runner-up, no longer the maybe someday child. I am the foundation now. I provide the roof. I carry the weight. I set the tone. And sometimes, when I hear my mom humming while she washes dishes, or my dad fixing something without complaining, I realize something even deeper. They're still learning how to love me. Not the version they tried to create. Not the one they hoped would act more like Alexandra. But me. And I'm learning how to let them. I still keep that letter in a drawer. The one with the thank you that came years late. Not because I need to reread it, but because it reminds me of how far I've come. I used to want their praise. Now I want peace. I used to chase their attention. Now I command my own space. And maybe the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. Maybe it's living in a truth so undeniable, even silence becomes acknowledgement. Because in the end, I was never the backup plan, I was the lifeline. And they know that now. Before I go, if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.